say who you are?
I'm Rob from okay. And I'm a GP in Aston. My practice is at Stanford.
Western Islands.
Yeah, in Western Islands. Now my question are two. One is about minimum wage increase going to increase. And in our GP contract negotiation, is that in your agenda to negotiate on that? Because practices will be affected by that. And other second question is, if some practices don't want to join MCP, what is GPC going to do? Because if enhanced services goes from that practices and other like immunization goes from that practices, then they are very difficult to survive.
Yeah. So the first question about the minimum pay, which I believe will go up in a year's time, we're already cognizant of that. And so when we have our contract negotiations, we will need to factor in that impact. The problem with that impact, it's very hard to quantify, because when you look at practices, for some it will have no impact because their pay is above the minimum. In others it will have a bigger impact. So it is quite hard to quantify, but it's on our agenda. It's on our agenda, and it will be part of our negotiations for next year. About your other example, this is where I believe the profession in local areas has to be properly informed and be collective in not feeling that anything has been done to them. And I really think that that's fundamental to this. So when you say the enhanced services will be taken away, all of this is almost giving permission to someone to do these things. We don't have to. If what you believe, and in practice in a local area believe, that what they want is to have some control of providing these services with enhanced services that's right for their patients, they don't have to enter those MCP arrangements that may threaten that. We do need to create an element of empowerment within practices of what they are willing to enter into. So no one can force you into this. So it does require a bit of work at local levels, using LMC to facilitate, and practices actually not feeling that they have to do something. Now, I can only tell you, when I go to my CCG meeting, I shouldn't be saying this, but it looks to me that it's like a headmaster addressing assembly. I see all these GPs just saying yes to everything. And I think it's a shame, because actually the CCG should be accountable to the practices, and GPs need to feel much more confident about what they want. But what you need to do is decide what you want and stake your claim for what you want. Don't feel that it's been done to you. So I agree with you. I wouldn't want you and other practices to challenge that.
Guy Wilkinson from Gloucester, here in Southside Gloucester. Just to clarify on the sickness £1,700 payment. Is it following the red book of 6 plus 6, 6 months full pay, 6 months half?
Yeah, so the SFE on the period of time has not changed. The only thing that's changed is the entitlement, which is now not discretionary. It's based on no criteria of this size. As long as the GP is working in your practice as a salary GP or as a partner, if they are ill for more than 2 weeks, you get reimbursement.
And is it a bit of a Mike Ashley question? If we were benevolent and helped our local colleagues by giving them 0 hours contracts, would they have the same entitlement?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer. I will take that away. Nick will take that away. I've never thought of it that way.
It could be a big win for federations to offer, combine.
It is, remember, a GMS contract, so it would have to be a GMS practice offering that, or being able to reimburse, be able to receive reimbursement.
You started off talking about the crisis in funding in particular and inequality. There's a lot of variation between different areas, CCG areas, in terms of the amount of funding per weighted patient. So take Manchester, where overall the lowest at 109, the England average is 149, and other areas get 210. Why is there that massive level of variation still when you have a national contract in the amount of funding that each practice gets for their weighted patient? And what are you looking to do to help with that? hopefully to bring everyone up to the level of the highest.
So I think you're looking at two different budgets. There's a budget that CCGs get, which is, and Alan's will be able to explain this, but there's a budget that CCGs get to look after their population, and that is part of a formula that over time is trying to achieve equity. So those that are furthest from target, so a CCG that is well below the target, will get a bigger uplift than a CCG above. So
this is NHS Digital, where it goes through individual payments to practices.
I know. So I'm just saying there's an overall CCG budget. Then there's a separate budget, separate amount you're talking about, which is the spend on general practice, which is not related to the CCD budget. It's related to spend, and that actually is about historic spend that individual CCGs choose to spend on general practice above the contract. So we had this back in 2004 when we had these the enhanced services floor, if you can remember those days, and we saw one area not even spending the floor, another paying twice as much. So this is about historic spend on general practice, which we do need to, as GDC does actually make the point that all CCGs, if they're delegated, need to be investing in general practice to an equitable level. So that is the investment in general practice. That's not a CCG budget. It's a local choice of how they invest.
I have specific questions about registration of temporary patients.
Yes.
We do get this frequently in our practice, and it's usually elderly population who have health requirements on kind of crisis point. And they bring with them quite a sizable workload. So is there a provision of fund for those patients?
So it's a really good question, and you know, so this goes back to the 2004 contract, which I did not negotiate. But one of the elements of it, which I was always, I'll be honest, concerned about, was that it fixed temporary resident fees into GP practice budgets on the activity historically. So each of our practices has got temporary resident budgets within our contract based upon the amount of the volume of temporary residents we had back in 2004. And of course, it was always going to be an issue, because that means that if you have a practice that now suddenly has, I don't know, becomes a tourist resort, or the volume of temporary residents changes because of, they will then basically be doing more work for no additional payment, and you'll have another area where in fact things could have a downturn, and they'll be paid the same amount for seeing fewer. So there is a problem that we have, well, I've never been happy with this arrangement. We've been unhappy. We've certainly raised it, and it's funny you say that. It's one of the things I would very much want to really try and address, because it is an unfair workload on some practices. I've heard, for example, in some of the seaside resorts, they see a booming of the numbers of TRs, and they're doing it without any payment. The Red Book, to be honest, when in 2004, did have a provision for local areas to pay extra where they could see there was an increase in demand, but like any discretionary payment, it was never made. But there was something in the contract that said that so. But the answer to your question is, it's definitely on our radar. I hope that's what you were meaning, yes.
Okay.
With regards to the...
Do you want to introduce that?
Sorry, yeah, Megan Harrison, Practice Liaison Manager at the CCG. With regards to the extended hours and the half-day closure, how sort of black and white is it going to be? Because we have practices that may close every other week, not every week, or we may have ones that do every third week, or, you know, is it going to be policed? How's it going to be?
So what we negotiated is that the wording was, would not ordinarily receive payment. Now we negotiated that word ordinarily because implicit in that word ordinarily is some discretion. So we're now at the moment trying to tease that out in terms of implementation guidance. And I would like to believe and hope that there will be sensible local interpretation. Now if you have a practice that is closed every Wednesday afternoon from 1 onwards, and it's surrounded by other equivalent practices that don't close, I think it would be a harder case to make Now, it's not saying that they can't close, it's just saying you won't receive payment to provide an extended hour session. There's a separate agreement we've made with NHS England that we would, with LMCs, look at half-day closure as a concept. So if you have got small practices for whom it will be very difficult to remain open throughout the week, one solution could be that it gets into a collaborative arrangement where the patient who needs a repeat prescription can still access that. So it's more about the patient having access to some of those services. It doesn't mean that you have to be providing you don't have to be seeing patients in a normal surgery, but it's having access to prescriptions, making an appointment, etc. And we now have the technological ability to create those efficiencies, and that will also apply to the rural areas. So there is some discretion. I just want to say that CCGs, whatever I said earlier, I think CCGs have a hugely important part to play. They can facilitate and make a huge difference to GP practices, and where that relationship works well, and where the CCG is facing general practice rather than facing a hospital deficit, and where the CCG really understands that the solution to hospital pressures is general practice, things work really well. And where a CCG is not, that's when the difficulties lie. So I'm sure you're trying to do a really good job.
I'm Nagpaul Sinha. I've been in touch with you on email from GP Workforce Forum.
Yes, you did. Yes, yes, you did.
It's about those failed doctors,
yes.
MRP, who haven't been able to do that exam and they are not on the register. I had a lot of talks with the HEE, Health Education England, and they have come out with a template. Now the problem with the RCGP that they are just not accessing, so they're just not bending at all. So are you still in touch with RCGP to try and push them a little bit to accept?
Sure. So we, as I said, we've got a workforce team for GPC. It's led by Krishna Kaswaranani, who liaises with you. I'll certainly take that back if you want to be specific. But this, it's a good example. So Dr. Sinha emailed me out of the blue, and so I tried to address the issue. So we are accessible. If anyone wants to contact us on a specific issue, we will respond. So I'll take that back. If you want to be more specific, we do meet, the answer to your question, we meet the RCGP formally on workforce issues, so we can raise the issue that you brought up.
I think I'd also add that from the Association of Greater Manchester's perspective, in fact, we've got a huge opportunity within the changes that are going on. I think you started at the start, Chaand, that some very exciting things are going on in Greater Manchester, which could pave the way for the future. And I think there's an opportunity for the RCGP to actually engage with Greater Manchester and the clinicians and the way of changing things to start to look at how we could work in a more collaborative manner. It's not just about GP practices, but it's also about the organisations, and not just the RCGP, but CQC, the regulators, which we've not talked about, and maybe more broadly, not just about healthcare. In fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions as well, Chairman. One of them is around the fact that we know that the big issue is around social care. The lack of social care is having huge impacts on the hospital sector, but it's definitely having huge impacts on us as well in general practice in terms of the visits that we have to do for a more ageing population, more of them being looked after in care homes and things. So is there anything in terms of the GP contract that looks at the social care and what we're doing? And my other question is around the fact that there is a crisis. No matter how much we say we need to increase the amount of money in general practice, we know that as a nation we've got to cut our cloth to the amount of money we have. If that's the case, in most other industries there's been a really significant transformation, but healthcare at the moment for most people, majority of the time is still the same. If patients want to book an appointment, they're going to have to turn up at the surgery tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, they're going to have to queue up in the cold, whether it's snowing or whatever it is, wait for the door to open and try and get an appointment. Do you really think general practice is ready for the kind of changes you're making? Or do you think we need to be a lot more radical, a lot more willing to change, and a lot more... Is the permission there for us to do this, or do we have to wait for guidance from above? Two questions.
So, I said before to you that GPs, when I look back since I became a GP, within the entire NHS, have been the most imaginative and innovative doctor group that the NHS has seen. We were the very first to computerise. And in fact, the early days when GP computerisation took off, it wasn't the government, it was actually GP practices who had their own computer system because they were interested in collecting data and providing good care. the innovations in the 90s, some of the innovations in general practice, some of the near-patient testing, trying to bring care into their practices, came from GPs. I mentioned the collaborative movement, the total person guidance, for those of you who are old enough to remember those days. So GPs have a very proud history of being innovative. In fact, even the new appointment systems that have happened were GP-led. EMIS, as a computer system, and others, actually were developed by GPs. GPs in their practice developing computer systems. Even now, we don't have hospitals that remotely touch the level of sophistication we have. So GPs are innately innovative, and I believe they are ready. The problem we have at the moment is that when you are drowning and engulfed, you don't actually have the space, the headspace, to innovate, because you're just trying to cope with just getting through the day. And you're trying to cope to just be safe, actually. As I said, most of us are just trying to avoid collapsing with pressure. What I think needs to happen in the GP Forward Review and these initiatives is there needs to be proper resourcing, dedicated resourcing for headspace. So there should be resourcing for project management, for practices to work together, where you actually get some locum cover and backfill, so the GPs can do the job properly of creating the innovation. And that's an argument I've given to NHS England repeatedly, that I come back to that £171 million, which is £3 per head. So if you look at your population, what size is your LMC?
200,000?
200. So you know what? That would give you around £500,000 to £600,000 over 2 years. That money could make a real difference if you used it to transform, or rather give you the headspace to transform and employ people. So I think we're up for it, but we can't do it in a lunch hour in between home visits. That's what I don't think we can do.
And social care?
Social care. You see, at the beginning of my set, I did have social care as a big block. What I showed you was the GP contract, which is the delivery of GMS services. And I showed a range of engulfing pressures, or rather factors, around the practice, including social care. And what we realised, of course, is that general practice is much bigger than your core contract. It is about the delivery of an expanding level of care for people and communities, of which every element impacts on us, and social care is at the heart of that. Which is why I do think that the solution for general practice isn't going to be just about looking at ourselves and the contract with ourselves. The solution of general practice has to be part of the solution for the NHS and social care. So you create a solution as part of that bigger jigsaw becoming the solution. You can't do it piecemeal. And that's what I think needs to happen. That's where I think, and I know this is something that matters a lot to you, and I believe patience and patient empowerment is part of that process as well. So it has to be a wider, whole system approach.
Sorry. This is one of my pet areas. I was extremely pleased to hear that with the plans for the frail elderly reviews, that there was no requirement to complete a care plan. Personally, I think care plans are not our role, are of limited value. I think they're in breach of information from government because we're asking for information just in case we need it, rather than when we need it. So I was wondering what the thinking was inside that had led to that decision for there to be no requirement for it.
Okay, so I will leave her. I'm sure Amir has his views on care plans or anticipated care plans, and I think the word care plan can mean different things for different people. But the thinking was very clear to us that we were aware, and we are aware that we are, and this is a good time to be aware, how much work goes into the process of an idea that is designed to care for our most vulnerable patients, and the process is taking us over rather than caring, and we were very clear about that. For government, and for the Secretary of State in particular, the older person agenda is paramount, so we knew this was going to be a difficult negotiation. And I think what our position was from the beginning was that if you give GPs the ability to have time to care rather than time to process, that is the best thing you can do for older people. rather than be worried about counting have you reached the 2%. We then said that if you are to do that, then target the patients who most need it. Now, I'm not sure about the severe frailty index, but we were given some research evidence that the severe frailty index is a reasonable indicator for those that most need our help. I believe we're probably going to find, like in any index, there will be people who are not there but should be there, and so we're trying to negotiate some flexibilities there. And what we said was that that the GP needs to review these patients. So what's in there is a review. The falls is important because we know that avoidable falls is a big issue for the NHS. We know that too many of our patients end up in hospital and have great distress themselves. So that's a perfectly reasonable requirement that we should be asking if a frail person has fallen or is at risk of falling. And finally, they were very keen on the enriched bit in the summary care record, which again doesn't force you to do anything, but it allows the patient to have important information about them to be accessible. So I think the thinking was, I think we spent a lot of time trying to explain how this would benefit patients and would actually, far from taking something away, would allow us to do our jobs properly. That was, and it wasn't, just to say, it wasn't an easy negotiation, because the starting point was, well, if you take, how do we know you also look after these people? So it was quite an iterative process. And the other thing to tell you about NHS England is that there are, when we talk about government, there are people within government who are quite reasonable, and there are others who are extremely politically driven, and politicians come in that bracket. But there are some in NHS England who do understand general practice. And what we always end up doing is trying to spend more time persuading them to speak on our behalf. And there are others who don't understand. So there are a dozen hawks. But it took a while. It took a while.
David Gibbs, I'm a bit of an imposter. I'm from Derbyshire LMC, so I took the opportunity to come on, so thank you, Willie. Can I just drill down in some detail about the compensation that's been discussed about the capital contract? It's a subject close to my heart. I saw that it's been announced that there's £250 per practice for the 16-17 to some recompense for the patient notes fiasco, and then the recurrent funding of the £2 million ongoing. You also mentioned some other compensation, because whilst you acknowledge that £2 million has been scientifically worked out in terms of the amount of time for the notes, the £2 million, what it doesn't take into account the amount of time that practice managers have spent on the phone to Capita, taking 45 minutes to get through, etc., etc. And you mentioned that there is some other compensation coming in potentially.
Right. So you're absolutely right. So in the contract, this is about funding the prospective work that we know will happen year on year, because the very process of labelling and bagging notes has reduced Capita's costs but increased our costs. So that is a prospective payment that we believe, we've done some modelling, is properly covered. In fact, more than is okay. About the retrospective, one of the problems is by distributing the entire resource, you ended up with this sort of smaller fee of £250 per practice, when some have been affected more than others. The other compensation is not a deal yet. I mean, in fact, to be honest, all I can tell you is we are arguing the case at the moment that this is bitterly unfair for some practices that can show that they have actually lost days, money, taking out loans, partners not drawing money, all sorts of other issues that need to be compensated. The problem with that is it would need to be tailored for the individual circumstance. But we are in dialogue. I'll be honest with you, that's what we're pushing for. The deal that has been agreed is around the 2 million and the averaging out of a resource as compensation. But the other is by no means on the back burner. It's an alive issue.
Thank you.
Mo, do you have anything that you want to add?
He's answered all my questions.
Anybody else?
Yes.
We've got a GP Alliance which is covering the 6:30 till 9 o'clock now, and Saturdays and Sundays. Our half day of the morning is Wednesday, and the practices are paid to the Alliance, and we have about 4 hubs where patients can bring up, get an appointment and see on Wednesday afternoon. And providing, we've got 8 GPs at the moment sat there and they are being used. But that still count.
So this is really, that's a really good question. So as I said, we
320 populace.
So we agreed, ordinarily would not, but what we would want to do is, I mean, that would be a very good case in point, that if the practice was still able to offer the patient access to GP services, if the patient's records, I think that's critical, that their records are available.
Yeah.
So when the patient sees the GP can see, and you know, so if that's available, I would like to believe that that would come under the flexibility within this wording. We are now, as I said, talking through the implementation. It's not going to happen until October, so we've got a bit of time. But if you want to send us that example, we can use that as a basis to say, look, when a practice has organised access to care in this way, surely that's reasonable. Where I think it would be more difficult is when a practice closes and the patient can't be seen with the benefit of the records. Then that's not providing the same sort of service. That's a different. So I think yours sounds extremely compelling. I'd be very happy if you give us an example.
We've got the IT in place so that all the systems can be accessed, providing the patient agrees to it.
Yes.
And the local GPs obviously get paid for that session, but are working. So we're done by local GPs, and it seems to be working quite well.
Good.
And we have a few phases to try and take some workload off them, but we wasn't sure whether we could continue. We were saying we had to open on Wednesday afternoon. But providing the receptionist is maybe there in surgery for prescription,
Yes.
then maybe that's a way around it.
I mean, my personal view would be that I would argue if that what you're describing took
Yeah.
place, so the patient had access to the basic services that a practice should offer, including things like making an appointment or getting a prescription, and if the patient was seen in a collaborative arrangement. Personally, I can't see how that falls foul. I think that's about trying to manage workload more effectively. Please send us your example. We'll borrow it. Sorry?
You like that sentence?
Yes, please.
Yes,
That'd
we
be really
are
helpful.
working within more than 12 months now.
Right. Very happy to
Doing
see
it
that.
quite well. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Can I just ask about the sickness payment again?
Yes.
Is that a standard payment of £1,700?
No. Okay. So the way it would work is you would be paid on invoicing up to a maximum of £1,734. So if you were replacing a doctor who was doing 5 sessions, it may well cover that, or 4 sessions will cover that. But if the doctor was a 9-session doctor, where the cost would be over £2,000, then you'd get the maximum of 1,700. So it's paid on invoice up to a maximum of 1,734.
So you say the 1,700 is equivalent to 9 sessions?
No, 1,734 actually is what the maternity payment limit is. For the sickness, it's actually lower. So we've increased the sickness to that limit. Now, obviously, looking to the future, we'll try and negotiate a more market level reimbursement. But that is so in fact, what we've changed is the eligibility being non-discretionary. We've changed prorating does not apply. We've allowed doctors within the practice to cover, which currently you don't. And we've increased for sickness the level to 1,734, which is the same as maternity. So I hope that makes sense. It's on actual invoice.
Okay. And is that, sorry, up to 12 months?
It is based on the SFE. I think someone here was an expert in the SFE. So whatever the SFE currently says, we haven't changed that bit. I think it's 6 months and 6 months half pay. Whatever is there.
I'm hearing from Oldham, and apologies is probably council GPs from Oldham. With the frailty index, we really do have to calculate frailty for our patients at 75 and above, but we're not using the FI, we're using the rocket this year. I know it says appropriate within the words
Yes.
and contracts to the practices which
You're absolutely right. I mean, we are absolutely behind this being a sensible approach, and if you have a tool to identify frailty which is not the EFI, I cannot see how that would be a problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chaand. That's been a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much for coming. And,